20 years ago, this coming summer, our family moved to Shelbyville, and obviously an oversight on our part when we came into town. We moved next door to John Hartnett. And quite an experience that was. As you may or may not know, we soon moved. The gentleman was very good. He shoveled a lot, and a lot of things did he shovel. Didn't always smell well. 1961, the radio station WSVL came into existence under John's managerial, what's that, acumen, or is that the good word? Or something. Indicates that he knew what he was doing. And he was the Santa Claus, if you may recall back then, in the Thanksgiving Day parade. And the next year, they thought, well, he was pretty good as a Santa Claus. We've got a better job for him, however, and he was going to spruce up the parade. He thought that we could liven things up on that Friday after Thanksgiving Day, and so he decided that he would get one of these white street cleaner uniforms and follow the horses, which is pretty indicative of the type of individual he is. He would be right at the rear end of the horse. So he was going to add a lot of frivolity and gaiety to the Thanksgiving Day parade, and so John thought, we'll bring these high school bands in. Well, of course, the high school bands indicated that we'll come and play in your parade, but we have to have at least $25 for some expenses and getting here, et cetera, et cetera. And so always the businessman that he is, John had on the back of this uniform, what do you have on the back of that uniform? Make your deposits at Shelby National Bank. Well, John and that bank have both done well since then. And for doing that, he sold Don Jones advertising on the back of that shirt he was wearing to help pay for the bands. But he wound up about $50 short. So in order to take care of that, he'd already bet some other businessman here in town $50. The businessman said, you won't do that. Go along behind those horses and scoop up the droppings. And of course, John had been here a little over a year. Man didn't know him very well. Now we know why John would do that, and probably that's his calling. Another indication on a St. WSVL used to have the St. Patrick's Day parade. Rarely was it on St. Patrick's Day, which we can understand that. It was on the Saturday closest to St. Patrick's Day, I guess, but the same type of problem. The radio had announced that we're going to have a St. Patrick's Day parade, and some resident down on West Broadway said, hey, I've seen all those parades I want to see. The horses stood around down here and lined up before the parade the last time, and we don't want any more of that. John says, don't worry, you call me if you have a problem. And the guy had a problem. On Sunday morning, John was reading his paper after this Saturday parade, and the fellow, evidently, the wind started coming his way, and he called John, and John came right down there with his shovel. He always was ready with a shovel, obviously. And John scooped it all up, and another gentleman came running a couple of houses away and says, hey, I saw that. I was going to use that on my flower bed. He sold it to him. He sold it to him. Well, I think you know a little bit now about the type of individual we're talking about here this evening. Irene, it was nice of you to be here, and I hope that you're not terribly embarrassed. We have some excellent individuals here who have had some contacts with this individual over the past 27 years, and we're going to start off with Don Beckham as our first roastee here this evening. The roaster. Don's the roaster. You're the roastee.
John Hartnett's been a friend of mine in Shelby counties for years. He has deserved and received numerous awards from most facets of our community for his humanitarian deeds. He recently was bestowed the coveted Sertomian Service to Mankind Award. And this dinner tonight, in his honor, is but another accolade to his dedication and good-humored nature he greets each day with. But folks, I'm beginning to worry about Johnny. I know a lot of you have worried about Johnny for a long time, but I'm just starting to. Yes, I'm afraid he's starting to get a big head from all these tributes and awards. What he doesn't realize is the swollen nature of his cranium is merely nature's frenzied attempt to fill a vacuum. Johnny may be a self-made man, but he looks more like a warning than an example. Self-made, worst example of unskilled labor I've ever seen. But seriously, ladies and gentlemen, he really doesn't enjoy this fuss, and he doesn't want you to treat him any differently than you would treat any other great person. So I think it's time to bring him back down to earth by discussing with you some of his personal characteristics and eccentricities. Johnny certainly has a face that grows on people, but if it grew on them, they'd certainly chop it off. Did you know that Irene has to drink a full pot of coffee every morning just to steady her nerves so she can look at him? John, your nose. Anyone counting noses would certainly have to count yours several times. It may be ugly, John, but it's better looking than the rest of your face. You look like an accident going somewhere to happen. But then that leads us into his driving, and I'm sure someone else will come up with a comment or two on that tonight. As you know, John was born in Buffalo, New York. It was a traumatic day for the Hartnett clan, as John's father was also arrested that day. I don't know, did you realize that, Irene? Had you ever heard this? John Jr., Pat? Oh, it's a sordid tale. It seems John's father took one look at his new son and ran off down the street to the Buffalo Zoo, where they caught him throwing rocks at the stork. Peeping Tom once reached inside John's window and pulled the shade down. But John's a man of polish, mostly right around his head. The reason John is so jovial each morning is he has reason to snicker every day. He shaves daily. Right after he combs his hair with his favorite sponge. John, it's too bad all your gray matter had to end up outside your head. Did anyone ever tell you what WSVL really stands for? It's an acronym for Why Shelbyville, Lord? In closing, John, you know we all really love you, even if you don't have any self-control. It's all Irene's. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. One thing that kind of bothered me as we began preparing for this, and the tickets were distributed, and I had a ticket and it indicated the St. Joseph cafeteria was going to be the location. And I found out right away where, among his own parishioners, where Mr. Hartnett stood when you see we're not in the St. Joe cafeteria. They said they had something important going on over there tonight, so here we are over here. So they probably have 400 or 500 people over there in the cafeteria. Ralph Leopard, you come up here. It's your turn to roast the gentleman to our left.
Well, I don't really belong up here, but Dana come in and asked me to roast John, and I didn't want to do it, and so he said that he was paying for the meal, so I decided I'd come, since it wasn't costing me anything. And I told him he probably wouldn't want me to roast him anyway, because I really thought John was a real slob. I see him coming in church all the time, and the sport coats he wears, he has trouble buttoning the front of them, and he looks like he slept in them all night, and his hair is usually mussed up, and you never know from one week to the next what color his hair is going to be. So
That's a real friend, John.
But one thing we do have in common is that we're both religious. Now I knew I'd get a laugh out of it. Well, we both belong to the same faith. We go to St. Joe Catholic Church, and during Lent, we try to go to Mass every day. And of course, the school children are at Mass also. And of course, Mass is usually at 8 o'clock. It's 8:15 now, it used to be 8 o'clock. Well, we've done this for quite a few years, and boys included. Of course, them guys really needed it. I didn't need it, but during the Mass, there are certain times that in the Catholic faith that you show a sign of peace by shaking hands with people around you to show good faith. And there's a few mornings that I'd come in late. Now, John has really embarrassed me several times. And so after coming in late, him and Boyce come in one morning, and I came in late, so we normally shook hands and being close around each other in the pews. So one morning when I came in late, him and Boyce came in, and of course John was across the aisle from me. And so he comes across to shake hands with me, and in the meantime he hands me an alarm clock. And I put it in my hand. Of course, he goes back across the aisle in the other pew, and I'm standing there with this alarm clock, so I stick it in my pocket. Well, Mass was going on, and about 5 minutes later, all at once the alarm went off.